Welcome to MSBA's Always Bored, Never Boring, the podcast.
Well, welcome back to MSBA's podcast. I'm Melissa Randol. I'm the Executive Director of the Missouri School Boards Association. And joining us today, we have Whaley, Senior Director of our Advocacy program at MSBA. And we have Shelly Mantel, who's MSBA's President and a local school board at Mountain View-Birch Tree. Welcome.
Be with you both this morning.
All right, Shelly, we're going to put you on the hot seat this morning, and we'd like to get your expertise shared with our listeners, and we're going to talk about school board service today. So why don't you start off, Shelly, giving us an overview of your service on your local board and, of course, your service on MSBA, and talk a little bit about what you've done, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty details.
Okay. Well, I've been on my local board in Mountain View-Birch Tree for about 15 years. And ran with the intention of just being part of the community, of helping grow and nurture our children so that they could have all the opportunities that children from all over the state had. I became involved with MSBA shortly after getting elected to my own board because they always make the new kid the delegate. So that occurred pretty quickly. And I was very glad to serve. And then through meeting and interacting with the staff and other board members who had been involved, I became very, very passionate about the mission of MSBA and the holding up of school board members that this organization does. My initial board service was a little bumpy, and I had a lot to learn, and MSBA helped me to understand my role because I really believe I came in thinking I could change the world kind of by myself. And I think that's probably one of the things that we have to think about most as a servant leader is it is part of a group. It is never just yourself that kind of guides the ship. And so being part of MSBA really helped bring me in to what was really my role as a board member. And then I kind of moved up the chain and ran for office. And this year I've had the honor of serving as president.
Very good. Shelly, something that Caitlin and I hear quite a bit around the state in Jefferson City and elsewhere is that when you look at school board service, it is really the most local level or local form of democracy. Help us understand what that means from your perspective.
Well, local control is pinnacle to school board service. We advocate for that all the time. And as a parent of children in your community, what more important thing could you do than make sure that the education of your children is as strong as it can be? I say over and over again, the community's education system is the future of the community. If you don't have well-educated children, you don't have well-educated employees, and therefore you have a failing community. And each little rural community, especially where I come from, contributes its own piece. We have a small little hospital that's part of Mercy's system, but we need qualified nurses and physicians and therapists, all of those professionals. We have lots of industry in the forest in our area, so we need conservation agents, we need forestry people. And if you don't have a foundation and if you don't have a future, then what does your community rely on for its success?
Shelly, I have a plaque in my office that says school boards are where democracy shows up in work boots. Would you agree with that?
I would tell you our board president right now he's a veterinarian in our community, and he literally comes with whatever he just did on his shirt.
Well, it's public service in its purest form, right?
Well, and I think, it's often forgotten and different than many kinds of public service, but you guys are volunteers. You're giving of your time, of your knowledge, of your expertise to your communities. You're putting in all the effort of running for an elected office to be given a handshake and a thank you and an opportunity to, pour yourself into your community. But it's an unpaid, volunteer, non-partisan position. It's about doing what's best for kids, doing what's best for your community, regardless of, what your personal feelings on politics may be.
Yeah. It's close to the people, close to the consequences. You go to the grocery store and you're faced with individuals who are going to have questions about your service. All right. Caitlin, we're just going to bounce questions back and forth to you, Shelly, and have a conversation while we have an opportunity to pick your brain and hear about your experience and expertise. Another question that we want to kind of unpack is, what do you think people most misunderstand about what school board members actually do?
I thought a lot about this because there's a lot of misunderstanding. I think the biggest thing is that board members have more power than people think we have more power than we do. I think the phrase, our power comes from unity, is a really important thing to keep in your head as a board member, because I individually am one vote of 7. And that vote doesn't matter unless we agree, or at least have a majority that are going in the same direction. We can have some pretty heated discussions about what that direction is. But let me tell you, nobody knows my political background. No one knows on my board who I am outside of my board service role. And I think that's so important, because what I think about outside of this particular role really doesn't matter. Yes, it influences our discussion, but ultimately it's what's best for the students in our district. And that doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat. It's about making good decisions fiscally, academically, making sure we're hiring the right people. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat when you're making those decisions. And I think people just misunderstand that we are part of a group of 7, a superintendent, and an entire community that watches us like hawks. And so this is not a one-man show. No matter how much you think it is, when you run to be a board member, you are running to be part of a community organization. And you have to remember that if you're coming with an agenda to change X, Y, or Z, it's going to come to a screeching halt, because that's not the role of a board member.
Caitlin, can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
As our Senior Director of Advocacy, why do you think it's critical that school board members are nonpartisan? You operate in a very partisan environment. So why is it critical for school board members to be nonpartisan?
Well, I think for a lot of the reasons that Shelly just outlined, you are, as a school board member, navigating so many different facets of administration and expected to, be a guiding hand for your administration and for your community and your school. If you're introducing, partisan ideals into that space, it becomes much harder to have open dialogue, to have that conversation if you have walked into that room so set in your ways about how things should go. I think, Shelly is a great example of, talking about how you need to come in and have those discussions. And yes, those discussions may be heated, and, that's not a bad thing, having hard conversations and tense discussions should be part of something as important as overseeing the education of our kids. But at the end of the day, you should be open to the idea that you can grow your own beliefs, that you can grow someone else's beliefs. And if you're so firmly set in, I'm this political party, or I'm only here to do this one, I'm only here with this one very specific agenda, how are you going to holistically support your district, support your community, and grow a school where there are people from all different backgrounds in that school, different from all different background, parents, educators, administrators, children. We welcome everybody in the public school system. We accept everybody. We educate everybody that walks through our doors. And so it's imperative that that our board members, our elected officials that are supporting everyone, really be open to growth in their ideas and be willing to have open dialogue without being so set in those political ideologies that can create barriers to what will be best for our kids.
So our loyalty is to what's best for children, not a partisan platform.
Absolutely. Just like our MSBA, statement says, supporting school boards to make sure every student succeeds. That's really what we're about at MSBA. And that's what school board service, in my view, is about, is giving every student what they need to succeed, regardless of where they're coming from or where we're coming from.
Yep. All right, let's dig a little bit deeper on that. So, Shelly, school board members, they juggle student needs. We've talked about that. They juggle community expectations, as you already mentioned, and tight budgets. That's something that you've dealt with, I'm sure, through your 15 years of service on the local board. What does that balancing act teach us about good leadership?
Well, it teaches us that you have to have priorities. You have to understand, in the big scheme of things, that the responsibility is great. I mean, there are 7 of us and your administrative team that are setting the future for literally 900,000 students in the state of Missouri. Think about that for a minute. Think about the responsibility that a bunch of volunteers have taken on in order to move our communities forward. St. Louis, Kansas City, Springfield, and then all the way to Little Birch Tree, Missouri, of just a couple hundred people. We're all doing the same thing, but in very different ways with very different priorities. And that's a huge challenge to education is we have to meet the needs of all of these kids from all of these different backgrounds and fiscal situations. And so if you don't come in with an open mind and understand that every student that walks through that door comes in with its own story. And we have to meet the needs of that story. And so being unified and having those conversations, it's really about students.
I want to drill down on that. And Caitlin, I'd like your thoughts on that. Shelly, what you said was incredibly powerful, that school boards shape the long-term future of their communities. Their decisions go beyond a policy or a partisan platform. They're actually shaping the future of their communities. Tell me what that means to you, Caitlin, from your perspective.
Yeah, we talk about education. Education is such a huge factor when it comes to the long-term health of our state, the, economic potential of our state, and then the individual potential of those students. We have the ability to set them up for success or set them up for failure, depending on, how we are supporting them in those early years, regardless of, what their, like Shelly mentioned, what their background might be. And we have kids in our schools that come from every every socioeconomic background you can think of. We have students that are coming from, there might be first generation high school graduates. They might be, have never had someone in their family go to college. And we want to support them to whatever outcome is going to provide what they want out of life, right? And so I think making sure that we pour into our schools and give them the tools they need to meet those students' needs, not just from a fiscal perspective in supporting them, but the flexibility to say not every student is the same and what success looks like for one student might be different than another student. I think that's really the critical, that's why it's so important. And, Shelly mentioned 900,000 students, but that's just in one year, and school board members serve 3-year terms. And so we're adding tens of thousands of students to that total every year. I'm not a math whiz, so I won't pretend to do the math, but, 15 years of board service for Shelly, that's several million students that have matriculated through our K-12 system during her board service. So it's bigger than just almost 1 million kids a year. It's millions and millions and millions of kids that are moving through our K-12 system. And how do we create something that will help them all find the best future, and then at a broader perspective, support our state and what our state needs, whether that's, people who go through career and technical colleges, people that go directly into the workforce or the military, or they want to pursue higher education. And how do we create a system that's supportive but flexible enough to help them all find success?
So school board decisions echo for decades
Absolutely.
throughout the community, throughout the state. It's why their service is so critical.
Right. And when you look at the economic development space and some of the conversations that are had when businesses consider where to locate, manufacturing facilities or headquarters, the workforce pipeline is a huge factor in that. And the basis of a workforce pipeline, setting aside, skills training, is K-12 education. If you don't have a strong K-12 system, you're not going to have a strong workforce pipeline to support that growth.
All right, we've talked a little bit about this, but I want to spend some more time on it because this particular next topic is one that's getting a lot of attention in Jefferson City. As we know, and you've already shared, Shelly, school board service in Missouri is unpaid. They're true volunteers, and they're nonpartisan. They do not run on partisan tickets. Two things that this association, our delegates that set our position, our board members around the state that set this position, we hold near and dear. Unpaid, nonpartisan. The nonpartisan piece is something that's being debated in Jefferson City, is that there's some belief that school boards should move to partisan tickets. And I know you've talked a little bit about it, Shelly, but this is such a critical piece and so important, such important work. Let's go back to that and talk about why right now especially, but both short-term and long-term, why is it critical that we protect that nonpartisan status?
So many facets to this conversation. Because partisanism doesn't matter. If a child can read and do basic math and be prepared for their future, to be well-rounded and emotionally stable because they're loved and supported, that has nothing to do with partisanship. That has everything to do with people who come there every day caring and learning about kids. And this push to move us to think one way or the other is a real challenge, especially as a volunteer. If we're going to continue to draw highly qualified, truly passionate people to school boards, we can't make this about politics, because you will keep people away from service because they don't want to put up with the fight. We see that every day in every aspect of our life, and I can go to my board meeting and not have to wear a hat of one or the other. I can just be there as a servant. And that, I just think we lose sight of that sometimes when you live in a political world. And I have great respect for all of our legislators and all of the people who are doing that work every day. It is hard work, but we can't let what our own personal beliefs get in the way. Yes, it forms. It absolutely forms my opinions, and the statements I make are part of who I am, but I don't wear that on my sleeve. I have to make decisions for all children, all families, from all walks of life, all religions, all socioeconomic backgrounds, and all futures. That doesn't matter.
What I heard you say is education works best when we focus on shared values, not political labels. When we focus on what's best for all children, regardless of where their families may have a partisan or political belief, we focus on all children and ensure all of their futures are successful, and our education system is designed for that.
And Melissa, if I'm understanding, they're trying to shift potentially even elections to different times of year.
Right.
And just to speak to the logistics of that, in the cycle of board service, we end our tenure in April, which is when the school year is concluding. It gives a board member the entire summer to prepare for what an academic year will look like. If you move these elections to November, it will totally overturn years of history of how this cycle works, and it works really well. And that's another piece, whether it's political or not. It's just the logistics of what a board cycle looks like.
Yeah. Well, and I have two things that I'd be curious to get your thoughts on, Shelly, as someone that, has served for quite a number of years on a local board. Is number one, you talked a little bit at the beginning about how you grew in your understanding of what being a board member looked like earlier on in your service. And do you think that having somebody be required essentially to walk in with a partisan label next to their name would would make more challenging interactions, at least in the beginning, for that board service? Do you think board dynamics would be impacted? And then my second question is, you mentioned that the shifting from April potentially to November elections, and you talked about, the logistics as a board member, but also the cost of running for office in running an election. I would be curious, do you think that it would take more, would you have to be more of a fundraiser to run an election in November as a unpaid board member versus April when, municipal elections, you don't have some of the influx of cash like I think you see in November elections?
So in regards to the cost of running, there's two different ways to look at that. One is the fiscal cost to run an ad, to do all of those things will increase. I've seen quite the gamut of conversation regarding how much it does cost people to run, just fiscally. And then there's also the personal cost of trying to be up against all of the other political people that are running, the events that are going on around that November election, because it's so much more involved. How do you find your way to the top of the pile of all of the different political ads and things going on in November? How do you have reasonable conversations in a time that is very partisan? So I feel like that April time is just a much more peaceful, much more has much more opportunity for people to have dialogue and even to plan events around whether your school board has like a forum to meet the candidates. It's just a time that's easier in the life of schools.
Shelly, I've heard it said that when partisanship enters the boardroom, the focus on students gets blurry. Would you agree with that?
I don't see how it can't. I believe that, again, there's religious and political affiliations. There's all kinds of different aspects of who we are. And of course that influences us. But when you start bringing politics into decisions, it just changes the dialogue. Again, it complicates something that's already complicated.
When you anchor decisions on students, the noise fades, right?
I think so. I mean, it's still complicated, but I think it's easier.
Caitlin, let's talk about that point Shelly just made. If we move to November, the discussion point has always been there are more people who show up in November than in April, and that's true. Mm-hmm. But we also see data that says that fewer people on the general election ballot, the November ballot, fewer people vote for the down ballot issues.
Yeah.
Is that accurate, and how would that impact school board elections?
Yeah, that you definitely see that. I mean, I can't pull the numbers out of my pocket today, but there's absolutely, as you move further and further down the ballot, and especially in a state like Missouri where we consistently see constitutional amendments and ballot initiatives, the length of our ballot gets longer, the number of people that fill out the ballot farther down gets less and less. You'll have people that walk into the voting booth and the only thing they'll fill in is a presidential ballot. And then, you'll have a few more that'll only go down to like your U.S. Senate races or your U.S. Congress races because those are what they're most familiar with. And you get less engagement, the further down the ballot you get. And some of that is an awareness issue, again, because, I think about judicial elections and how many people are really familiar with, members of the judiciary that are up for election when they're filling out those ballots, because they just don't run these big flashy campaigns in the way that some of our other electeds do. And the same thing would be true of school board members in a lot of instances where they're, those are volunteer positions. They're not, they're not drawing in big campaign dollars in a lot of instances, with the exception of maybe some of our larger areas. I think it would just be, I don't know that you would see the engagement, because the thing they always say about municipal elections is your voters tend to be more engaged voters and are more aware of what they are or are not voting for, versus November elections. You get a much higher turnout, but they're not always the same level of engagement. And when we're talking about school board service and education, as we've kind of hammered on today, the understanding of what function a school board should serve and nonpartisan board service and keeping the focus on children and not on politics would absolutely be lost in a November election. And as someone that has made their living following the legislature, how many times I have seen a decision in the legislative branch or the executive branch be dismissed by the other side because of partisan politics and brushed away, whether it was a good decision or a bad decision. Regardless, we've come into this environment where we are often just dismissive of whatever decision is made or whatever position is taken based on our partisan affiliations. And so as a community, it would be much harder, I think, to place trust in these elected officials that are volunteers that are overseeing the education of our kids. How would our communities trust that the decisions they're made are in the best interest of students and not just in the interest of their partisan affiliations, if that's where we want to go? And I think that would be a very challenging dynamic. I would, community trust, the trust of the school teachers and the administrators that they're overseeing, that those decisions are rooted in best interest of students and not partisan politics. I think that's so critical and central to what their work is as a board. It would be just devastating to lose that ability to make the focus about kids.
Yeah. So to sum up, 3 primary concerns from moving with the idea of moving school board elections from April to November.
Absolutely.
One is the cost. It's going to be far more expensive for school board members, volunteers, to run for a volunteer position because all of those other campaigns that are occurring at that time obviously increase the cost to buy ad space, to buy signs, to buy all the ways you get your voice heard. The second one, because it's going to be more difficult to get your voice heard, you're going to be lost in the noise of the other elections. People are going to be less aware of the candidates on the ballot running for those school board positions. And 3, the risk of more partisan control.
Yeah.
Focus won't be on students. It'll be on a partisan platform.
Yeah.
Shelly, as we wrap up, I would like to hear your thoughts. Caitlin and I would like to hear your thoughts on what you would say to parents or community members who care deeply about our schools but feel turned off by today's political climate. They'd like to run for school board, but this political climate just feels icky. What would you say to them?
I'd say what I'd say to anyone who cares. If you care, you have to get involved. You can't stand down just because it's hard. Running for school board is not easy. Not putting up, right? That's not the right word. But when you have to be the voice to constituents who really struggle to understand all the different moving parts of education, I just think you have to be willing to serve. Just like you have to serve your families and your churches and your community organizations, your businesses. You go to work every day because it matters. And school board service matters. What our children get from us as educational institutions, their lives literally depend on the work we do. So if you're afraid, then it's probably not the place for you. But if you have the courage to lead and to work with other like-minded individuals, then I encourage anyone who cares about the future of their communities to run for their local school boards. It's just such important work.
All right. Well, Shelly Mantel, president of MSBA and local board member for Mountain View-Birch Tree, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your expertise with our listeners and for the service that you provide to MSBA and to the state of Missouri.
You're welcome. It's been an honor and a privilege to serve and to be a part of an organization that really does put children first. The time and energy that I have put forward in the last 15 years has just been super rewarding. And I think it's just so important that people understand, even at the MSBA level, when we all come together, we come together with one very focused point, and that is to make education in Missouri as good as it can be. We come together to have really good discussions about the future of education in our state. And if all entities will come together and have the same focus, we can accomplish so much more than if we continue to bicker and carry on about the little details, when really it's the end goal of having a really highly qualified workforce with children and adults who become productive citizens. That's our goal. And I really appreciate MSBA standing beside school boards, helping us to be the best we can be for the students of Missouri.
Shelly, thank you.